front, all of you. Okay, today I have the honor of introducing one of our dissertation proposal presenters, Jeremy Solin. And I am going to give you a little bit of the kind of PhD culture, academic culture, which I call the academic rigor with personal vigor. So if you combine the two, you got it right. So I think Jeremy is one of those people who has embodied both the idea of academic rigor as well as the personal vigor that you are transforming and you are ready for the next step of your life and the community. So I remember Jeremy coming to check us out before he applied, and at that time, me and Team Crude and one more person met him at the cafe there, Crossroads Cafe, and his face was grim and he was not smiling at that time. He was like suspecting, like, is this degree going to make me a professor or a professional? You know, that kind of anxiety that people come with to Prescott College and in 6 months it's all gone, and look at his smile now. That's what happens. That is what happens. So, what we have to do to bring a smile to Jeremy? Just come on. So, what is it? First of all, what we do is we try to see who everybody, each of you are coming from your own path, and you will be following your own path. With these 4 or 5 years together in this journey of your life, what do we do? Right? So, first thing is to find out who everybody, each of you want to become, and we develop your curriculum according to that. So, accordingly, what Jeremy and I have done is found probably the perfect people in his community, so that he gets the depth of the content in his area, that is the place of food system. See, he's already inventing a new vocabulary to understand agriculture and food system, a place of food system. If you do any Google search, you will not find this title. It will be Jeremy's contribution to knowledge. You see how it is. So he has Eugene Anderson, who is one of the famous anthropologists who writes on food. He has traveled globally, works with the Maya people, and he is the one who wrote the book called Ecologies of the Heart, comparing different cultures and what they mean, place, food, all that. And also he wrote a book called Everybody Eats. Then I wanted someone for Jeremy from Wisconsin, who is a sociologist and who works on food system. And Jack Kloppenberg is a friend of mine, and I said, Jack, there is a young man from Wisconsin, you need to work with him. And he's in. And then I invited Delafruz Williams, another friend of mine from Portland, to join us to help on the educational side, pedagogical side. So with the 4 of us, Jeremy is doing a lot of path-breaking work, which you will see. And those of you in cohort 8 and 9, I want you to recognize and pay attention to his research design. How is he trying to find that idea of place in food system? How is he combining both the qualitative and the quantitative part? Look into that. Okay, sir.
All right. I think I'm done. So thank you, Pramod, and thank you all for being here. I'll say, just as a follow-up to that, I haven't smiled the whole 3 years. But I'm smiling now, and that's good. So just a quick, how's my sound? Sounds really tinny and weird to me, but sorry. All right. What's up? I can't go any further. So this is the kind of scope of my presentation. I'll talk a little bit about the project overview, a little bit on literature review, focus in on the sense of place a little bit, talk about my methodology, the analysis that I plan to do, and kind of significance moving forward. But before I do that, I want to share a little bit of gratitude, and I think over the last few years, I've really gained a deep understanding, and it's still growing, but understanding and appreciation of all of the ancestors, both human and non-human ancestors that I stand on the shoulders of. So I want to recognize that. And I also want to say that I've been incredibly fortunate about who I get to currently call friends and colleagues and family. And obviously I don't have time to recognize all those people, but I want to recognize a few of them specifically. My incredible partner, Abby, who I think is on there. Hello. And our kids, Clara, Ella, and Simon. Thank you for persevering with me through this. My mom and dad, Abby's mom and dad, all of our extended family, and ancestors on back. And then all the folks at Prescott, all of you, administration, faculty, students, staff who make all this possible. And in particular, cohorts 1 through 6, some of you are still around. Thank you for forging the path for all of us through this program, and particularly folks in cohort 6 for all you shared with us and specifically with me. And then finally, cohort 7, you all know how I feel about you. You are amazing and brilliant, and it's an honor to be here with you. You're good people, so thank you. And so I could just stop there, and maybe I should stop there, because in reality, to me, that's what it's all about, really. It's about love for each other and love for our places. And that's really why we're all here and why we do this work. But convention has it that I should share my project with you. So I'll do a little bit of that. So the project, as you could tell from my title, hopefully, exploring the relationship between sense of place and engagement in community food systems. So civic engagement in community food systems. And really the big idea that I'm thinking about is how can sense of place and connection to both the human and natural communities really serve as a common motivator and connecting point for sustainability, stewardship, regeneration, however you want to think about that. And I think that's possible. I think we need something that brings us all together, and I think place can do that. We can understand what sense of place is and help to develop that within all of our community members. A little bit of my path on how I got here, just a few waypoints. So I grew up, a lot of you have heard this already, I grew up in the woods. When I think about home, I have no conceptualization of a house. I just picture the woods in which I grew up. And I've always been incredibly connected there, felt incredibly comfortable there. And as I left that place where I grew up and went to college, I started to think about my experience and why people I grew up with, including family members, may have had similar experiences but had way different worldviews and different approaches to their places. For me, the sense of place is always kind of my foundational motivation for taking care of that place and the other places I ended up. But that was different for other people I grew up with. So that kind of started me on this journey, 20 years ago. And then about 7 years ago, I helped to start an organization called Farmshed in Stevens Point, which works on growing the local food economy in central Wisconsin. And we did a lot of work around doing that, but we came at it not from the perspective that food was some inherently special thing that we have to figure out and deal with in our community, but we came at it from the perspective of food as a connecting point, a way to build community, and a way to move our community towards sustainability. Again, it was that connecting point. Everybody eats. We're an agricultural community. But what I realized just recently, probably over the course of the last year and a half, as I frantically scrambled to figure out what I was going to do for my dissertation project, and in reflecting on my own sense of place, I realized that my work within Farmshed was really about rebuilding a sense of connection and belonging in the community that I'm in now, basically in reflection of how I felt as a kid, connected to that place and a sense of belonging and purpose there. So that basically brought me to this project. Being a PhD student, thinking, well, if that was my experience, are there other people who are having similar experiences? What are the experiences of these folks who are involved in community food systems, and how does sense of place play into that? So that's how I got to this point. Again, I didn't smile through that whole process, but it wasn't necessarily easy. So literature review. Broadly, these are the topics of my literature review: sense of place, community food systems. Yesterday, Claire talked about some of these aspects: civic agriculture, sustainable food systems, local foods, and then civic engagement and sustainability education, specifically within sustainability education, place-based education, and critical place-based pedagogy. I'm not going to touch on all of those because there's a lot there. That literature review is pretty crazy. It covers crazy fields, integrates crazy fields: anthropology, sociology, psychology, philosophy, literature, arts, kind of all across the spectrum, which was really fun. But obviously I can't get into all that. I do want to focus a little bit on sense of place, and I want you to help me with this a little bit. So I want you to think about a place that's important to you. I'm not going to give you much time to do this, but a place that it could be a place in your childhood, a place that you currently live, a place you visited, a place you've only been to once. Whatever it is, but I want you to capture the image of that in your mind and hold that for a couple of seconds. Usually when I do this activity, I let people talk about that, but if I did that, this room would erupt into massive voices, and I would never get you back. Because what I know about this is that this was a powerful reflection for you, most likely, for the vast majority of you. And if we think about why those places are important to you, I'm guessing, and we don't have time to go through all this kind of individually with you, but I'm guessing essentially that you will capture what the literature says about why place is important and how a sense of place develops. So we know that place is important because it becomes part of who you are as a person. You begin to identify with a place, with places that are important with you, are important to you. You get something from them. It may be something spiritual, it may be something physical, it may be making a living, it may be food out of a garden or out of a lake or whatever it might be, but you get something from them. They have emotional, spiritual, physical, and cognitive meanings in some way. And they also connect you to something larger, whether that's a person that you spend time or people you spend time with in that place, the natural community, whatever it is. And yesterday, we heard a fair amount from Janet, Kiara, and Jen about early childhood experiences and the importance of those and significant life experiences. This is another way to look at that, basically with this sense of place lens. But these places are, incredibly important to us. So I will say, again, this is basically what the literature says about sense of place out of all these different fields. And there's lots of different perspectives on this. You can find perspectives obviously counter to this, but generally this is what the literature says. Out of that, I developed a schematic, a model of kind of what sense of place looks like, which I'll go through really quickly here. And to the best of my knowledge, no one has put this together quite this way. I'm not really sure why, because I don't think it's earth-shattering in any way. It just seems pretty straightforward, but all of our human experiences are set in place, right? Regardless of what we're doing, where we are, our experiences are set in place. So this biophysical place, which represented by the blue box, which is not meant to be anything except for just space. Within that space, we develop a particular connection to that place and a set of meanings in that place. But all of our actions are set in place where even virtual experiences, you're still someplace when you have a virtual experience, right? So you can't get out of place. Some people say, Casey said, we are born more than earthlings or humans, were born placelings. We are born somewhere and we continue to be placelings throughout our life. That's not always the same place. Sense of place can be thought of in lots of different ways, from a phenomenological standpoint, also from a more positivist standpoint. I've kind of integrated this into two broad areas that are really integrated together and you can't separate, but place attachment are kind of those emotional, spiritual, physical connections to place, and then place meanings are what those places mean to you. And we can think about those in lots of different ways. That sense of place then motivates place action in some way. And through taking action in place, whether that is deliberate or just part of habit, we influence the place in which we are acting, right? So we begin to develop this co-evolving system, in a sense, that includes place, us, and the actions that we take in that place. That's our personal sense of place. There's also a sociocultural sense of place. We can think of this, the easiest examples are related to religion. As a group of people, we say certain places are sacred. We do that not just in sacred places, but we do that with parks, we do that with historic buildings, a whole host of things that we as a culture say these are also important places. We have kind of a sociocultural sense of place about them. So this is essentially the model that I'm working off of. And kind of the summary of this is that all places have human meaning. Without meaning, places aren't places. They're empty space, in a sense. What I will say about that is this is a human perspective on this, right? I don't think sense of place is only held by people. I think a fox can have a sense of place, and places can have fox meanings to them, but to us, places have human meaning attached to them. Place and sense of place co-evolve. Sense of place can also be held at multiple scales. I can hold a sense of place for a tree, I can hold it for an entire ecoregion, and anywhere in between. And sense of place is a motivation for place action. The one thing I'll say about that is that there's not a line that you cross that all of a sudden you have a sense of place. There's a spectrum that exists there. Some places you're very strongly connected to and have a lot of meaning. Other places, not so much, but every place has a human meaning associated with it. All right, so I'm going to go through the rest of this pretty quick. I'm not going to go through all these, but basically, out of the literature review, we can say that sense of place motivates human behavior. At least it can. It's not always the primary motivator. Sense of place is also developed from both the ecological and social aspects of place. We often think about it just as a natural kind of phenomenon, but it's also about the human community and human relationships. And one of the really interesting things, and this is about my experience again, that childhood sense of place in particular seems to be really important about kind of how people develop sense of place later in life. People take action within food systems for a variety of reasons. Sense of place may motivate that, may not, we'll find out. But there are justice issues, equity issues, health reasons, all kinds of reasons that people take action in place. I think that pretty well captures that. So that gets me into my research questions. Again, the major question is, what is the relationship between sense of place and engagement in community food systems? And then sub-questions under there, which essentially fit right into my methods. How does sense of place motivate engagement in community food systems? On the flip side of that, how does sense of place develop basically through that engagement? So again, we have this interrelated relationship there. Again, I want to explore this idea that childhood sense of place is an important motivator for engagement in food systems. And I also want to see how people identify with communities, natural and human communities, in a way that motivates their engagement in food systems. So methodology, this is kind of a whole mishmash in a sense in my brain still. And I can call it lots of different things from lots of different perspectives, but generally what I'm calling it is narrative inquiry influenced by phenomenology with bits of, all kinds of other things thrown in there. So the ethnographic part of it is that I'm looking at organizations and groups and doing observations of those and trying to capture what that group is doing. And then I'm also developing case studies of those organizations. So there's a whole bunch of pieces kind of integrated in, but generally what I'm trying to do is capture the stories of the individuals involved with community food systems organizations. And that's the narrative inquiry part. So I'm working with 3 groups in Wisconsin. This one, Central Rivers Farm Shed, is the organization that I helped to start about 7 years ago. They're right in the middle of the state. We generally describe them as a Western European semi-rural community. Oneida, which is one of the First Nations indigenous groups in Wisconsin, they have a phenomenal effort called the Oneida Community Integrated Food Systems project that's over in the eastern part of the state. And then Alice's Garden is in Milwaukee, so a very urban population. It's actually in one of the poorest parts of Milwaukee, which is one of the most segregated and poorest cities in the country. But they have a 2-acre garden that is basically the center of their neighborhood and community organizing. So amazing, amazing organization. I'll be working with about 10 people out of each of those groups, trying to capture their stories. Specifically, I'll be holding focus groups. I've actually held focus groups with each of those organizations. The intent of that is kind of capture broadly what is the context and what's going on within that organization. I have a brief demographic survey just to get a little bit of who they are. The kind of core focus of the research is semi-structured interviews with all 30 participants, and we'll see, there might be a few more thrown in there. The groups have a hard time narrowing who I should talk to, which is a good problem for me to have in some ways until I get to transcribing. But these semi-structured interviews, I've done about 7 of them so far. They take, on the low end, an hour, but those are pretty rare. Most usual 2 to 2.5 hours a piece of kind of exploring kind of these themes of place, how they're engaged in food systems, and what is their sense of place and kind of where does that come from. Analysis, I'm still working on this a little bit, but generally using thematic analysis, and I think this will continue to evolve through time. Discourse analysis will be part of this as well, kind of looking at the metaphors that people are using to describe their relationships and their actions in place. But a big part of this is critical pedagogy of place, and really looking at this idea of decolonization and inhabitation or re-inhabitation. It's basically, how do we overcome the power structures and the crazy history that we've had in a lot of these places, and how do we develop practices that are place-based to re-inhabit our places. And I'm really interested in how we do that across diverse geography and diverse cultural backgrounds to see what we can find as kind of shared practices and shared interests within that. So right now, these are the broad themes. Inhabitation, again, are the practices that people have within food systems. These range incredibly from foraging, hunting, foraging, to community organizing and kind of everything in between. What are their motivations? Those are also very widely. Sense of place, both attachment meetings. The place itself, what are the relationships and community structure in that place? The expectations have to do with kind of the social dimension of that, of being part of a group. What does that mean? What are the expectations placed within a member of that community, both human and natural community? How I'm going to capture the natural part, I'm not sure yet. Jen and I will figure that out together. And then decolonization, the power structures, injustice issues, and all of those things. And then significance, and again, this is what I'm hoping will come out of this. I think we're going to find ways to more actively engage people in food systems work. I also think we're going to contribute to an understanding of place-based education and how we help people to learn about their place. Generally, we approach place-based education from a very programmatic standpoint. My perspective on that is that that's important, but particularly for adult populations, they're not interested in programs, they're interested in being involved and connected. So there's some new I think some new ways that we need to think about place-based education that are not about providing programs, but providing experiences. I hope that comes out of it as well. So with that, thank you again, my committee members, who Pramod mentioned, and my crew, Abigail, Clara, I don't know how well you can see this, Clara, Ella, Simon. So thank you. Questions? Abigail. Oh, do we have a mic?
Yes.
I'm just interested to hear what your early findings are, given that you've already immersed yourself somewhat in the research.
Yeah, so I'm not real sure. I've done the interviews and I listened to them while they were talking. I haven't gone back yet. What I will say is that so far I've interviewed 7 people and done focus groups in 3 communities, so I've had connection with about, I would say 15 people so far, in one way or another. One of the common themes, every person I've talked to has had gardening experience as a child, which was pretty surprising to me in a lot of ways. But for the most part, this idea that childhood sense of place is a motivator is interesting. I would say generally it's holding true. The people I've talked to don't necessarily realize it until I begin to ask those questions, and then they begin to kind of connect some dots and like, oh, that's really interesting. I never really thought about it that way. And the way it comes up in interviews is before I even ask questions about what their childhood was like and if they had special places in childhood, they talk about childhood experiences, and they talk about a sense of belonging or a sense of connection to other people or other places in childhood. And then I'm able to follow up and ask them to talk about that a little bit more. So that's been pretty interesting. But there's definitely a theme within that seems to be. And then the other thing that's been fascinating to me, I've talked to a couple of farmers. I've talked to 3 farmers. 2 of them are very place-based. Their focus is maintaining community in small farms and taking care of their places. And then one farmer just really liked to work. He could have been anywhere doing anything. So there's definitely, there are outliers within those realms, but lots of amazing place stories at this point. So, yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. That was great. And this is probably a very small part. You had mentioned in your literature review that you had covered a lot of just a very diverse body of literature. And wondering if you had come across the concept of disinterestedness at all, and whether there's any discussion there about that concept. And because you had mentioned also how this is a very human-centered perspective, which is natural. That's who we are. But then also the concept of disinterestedness. Having an interest in something, but not for myself, but for either someone else or another community. Other interests.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that I've found anything real specific. The way it came up in my literature review is kind of how place gets transferred, a sense of place gets transferred. That is kind of that concept in a way that people can transfer a sense of place, and I think it has to do with, best I can tell so far, is how strong that connection was in childhood or a previous experience that then carries forward to that desire again to take care of a place. But it's not always about the individual. It's often about the land or the community. Is how it's at least manifested. So I think there's some connection there, but I haven't got into that real specifically. So I'd be interested in anything if you have some recommendations.
Okay. Okay, so my question is, I was wondering if in any of these 3 organizations that you're working with, like in their mission statements or how they write about it, do they talk about anything is that, is place, or any of that, is it part of any of their objectives, and how did you come to those 3 choices, and does it fit into their organizational theme?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't specifically look for that in choosing the groups. My main interest was in geographic and cultural diversity within the state. And the reason I chose Wisconsin, one is that I live there, but two is that there's a lot happening within Wisconsin related to food systems. It's the one of the highest per capita of organic farms in the country, lots of upstart local foods organizations. So there's just a lot going on. So, and then as I looked at those organizations, I kind of looked for diversity in how they're approaching and working within their communities. That said, none of them specifically talk about place in a direct way. Farm Shed would be the closest, where they, within their goals, there's a lot about local, but it's not talked about in a place sense. It's kind of like defined local.
That's,
So,
I mean, that's
yeah.
not say this is not, it's practical, not theoretical.
Yeah. So yeah, Farm Shed is the closest. The other two, well, you could say the Oneida one is from a different perspective. They're focused on food sovereignty, and so they're about providing for the community. So there's that aspect, and then Alice's Garden is really about empowerment of community members, which you could, draw that connection to. So, yeah. Thanks. So I'll say before Noelle talks, she's one of the reasons I get to smile now. She was like the end of my deal of trying to figure out all this stuff in Vegas. So thank you, Noelle.
Oh. So I, of course, love your work and love the idea of place. I want to sort of unpack something you said about place and open space, things being just open space. And I know your beliefs, and I'm thinking that I must have misunderstood. So can place, here's my question, can place have a sense all of its own, not in relation to an individual, whether it's a fox or a human? Can the place itself have a sense?
Yeah, I would say yes. And again, I think we can think about that from multiple perspectives. I think a tree has a sense of place, and that system, those all become nested systems, right? So you get to the point of the place having a sense of place as well. So within any living system, well, I'll step back. I'm reading a book right now, Eduardo Cohn, title is How Forests Think, which is basically helping us understand how living systems think and are conscious and all of these things, which would point to that specific experience of the place itself. So yeah, the thing that challenges me there is how do we capture that as a human? I can understand the human meaning and the human connection and all of those things. How we capture it from a different perspective is the part that I try to figure out in place. But
maybe your postdoc could be how gardens think. Do you understand it? Anyone else?
yeah,
You had mentioned briefly that.
we'll have to do this so we get it in there.
Thank you. You had mentioned briefly that adults seem to want experiences and not programs. I was just curious a little bit more about what you're seeing there and what the distinction may be and what's presented to the adult population.
Yeah, and this is somewhat anecdotal, and it's somewhat tangential as well, but what we're seeing within Wisconsin, particularly with millennials, is that they're not program attenders. They, if someone says, come and learn about this thing, they're going to say, well, that's really interesting, but, I'm going to go hang out and do something else on my own or with another group of people. They don't necessarily want to belong to things. This is a social trend as well. Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, and there's a lot of social trends this way. I think some of that has to do with just kind of the expectation of being self-directed versus responding to what someone else thinks they should know. And I think people really, at least people I come across, inherently want to be involved and want to do good things and want to be part of the community and want to be connected, but they struggle with how to do that, and they're not going to go join a group that they're not familiar with. So I think we have to rethink how we kind of package those opportunities and experiences for them. So it's not that we're not that people are providing education aren't providing things still. It's just how they're packaged and what type of experiences people get out of that. Generally, you're all here generally because you have to be. To pull people in off the street and to sit here and listen to us talk isn't, that's not where people are at generally, right? They want to go do things and be involved. So that's the perspective on that. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to think about that. There's already great things happening, but we often think about place-based education as programs that we provide where people come to us, they do something, they have learner outcomes, and it's very formal, even if it's in a non-formal setting. So.
If no one is there, I would like to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, from your experience working with 3 groups in Wisconsin, what is happening with the decolonization, re-inhabitation, and recolonization is also happening.
Yeah. Wisconsin's an interesting state, like a lot of places are. I mean, we're in Arizona. So I can't say too much about Wisconsin maybe, but Wisconsin, some of the huge issues we're dealing with from a colonization standpoint, one is a huge mine that's, how would I say this, on the edge of one of the tribe's lands. Most of the impact would fall onto the tribes. It's in their watershed. One of their major food source, wild rice and fish would be heavily impacted by this. And it's a whole government, private, effort to basically take this land and do this. So there's that aspect of it. But generally, what I would say, that crisis has also brought opportunity, and I think we're seeing more collaboration between parts of the state and cultures of the state to figure out how do we live well in this place, from focusing on local economies that are very place-based, ecologically based economies, thinking about jobs in a completely different way than we've thought about in a while, and also honoring, recognizing the indigenous knowledge that exists there, and not appropriating that, but bringing that into the discussion about how we move forward as communities. So there's a lot happening on both sides. We could spend lots of time talking about. Claire would be another good person to talk to about that. So I think with that we're done. But thank you all very much.